Errol Barnett is traveling with the president at his golf course in New Jersey. Joins me now from Piscataway. So, Errol, we know at least 7 people were in this meeting. This list keeps growing. Can you tell us more about these additional names that have been added?
Well, let's just tally up who we know was there. First, you had Team Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, who was the chairman of the campaign at the time, and Jared Kushner, the trusted advisor to then candidate Trump and now the president. Then you had the intermediary, Rod Goldstone, the publicist who was in email contact with Donald Trump Jr. to set this meeting up and introduce him to the Russians. That gets us up to 4 people in the room, and then you have the Russians. As I mentioned there, you had Natalia Veselnitskaya, the Russian lawyer, lobbying to get sanctions lifted. She had a translator with her, Anatoly Samoshornov, and in addition to those individuals, the AP is reporting on Renat Akhmetyan, who I just discussed in that story, who is a Russian-American believed to have links to Russian intelligence. Now, CNN is reporting on an 8th individual they say, quote, was there as a relative of the meeting, as a relative of the family member who requested the meeting. And you have this discrepancy on exact numbers because the Trump campaign was not completely forthcoming at the time, and only last week, when the New York Times said it would report on this meeting, did Donald Trump Jr. start to release changing details about who was there. So journalists are essentially having to piece this together because the Trump campaign itself has not been forthcoming.
And we know, Errol, for days the president has been praising his son for being transparent. What do you think the implications are here for the Trump family?
Well, it raises serious credibility issues for Donald Trump Jr. As I mentioned, he only sent out a tweet showing his emails of setting up this meeting because the New York Times was going to run with its story. So the key question for him is, why wasn't he transparent about this when it took place? It also raises questions about how much President Trump knew. We know that he was briefed some 3 days before the New York Times published its story, and it seems, based on public statements, that he wasn't aware of this meeting, which begs the question, how could the man who is elected because of his business success not know what his trusted campaign team was doing, especially when you consider they were meeting with people connected to the Kremlin. So it now raises serious questions about how, as you look back over the past year, these public statements saying that the stories of Russian collusion are fake news, it brings all that into question and raises credibility issues for essentially Donald Trump Jr., his father, and the entire Trump team.
Yeah, and you know, there's various Russia investigations taking place in Washington right now. How do you think this new information affects the direction of those investigations?
Well, in some ways, it brings it into focus. I mean, this is information we're seeing in the public realm, but this could be very well where the FBI and House intelligence investigations are already going. It is believed that when Jared Kushner updated his security clearance paperwork, evidence of this meeting came up, and that's one possible way of how it was got to the New York Times. It's unclear who handed over that information, but it also sets up a very clear timeline. This meeting took place just a few weeks after Donald Trump clinched the Republican nomination for president. So it was clear he was in contention to become president. And within that very short amount of time, you have Russian-linked lobbyists and lawyers making efforts to meet with Trump's inner circle and being successful. Does that have anything to do with President Trump being quite complimentary toward Russia and President Putin? Well, we just don't know, but certainly that will be, or already is, a path of questioning that the investigative teams will follow.
Yeah, certainly a lot of dots still left to connect. You mentioned Jared Kushner and how he's updated the foreign contacts list for his security clearance. We know at least twice. He added about 100 more names in the past. So he's come under fire for these undisclosed contacts. He met with the Russian ambassador to the United States at the time, as well as wanting to set up the secret communication channel with the Kremlin. How problematic do you think this is for Jared Kushner, this new revelation?
Well, as I mentioned, it raises the same credibility issues for him that the rest of the Trump team faces. Why didn't he volunteer this information, meeting with Russians or people linked to the Kremlin ahead of time? But you do have President Trump trusting Jared Kushner and also being a relative, right? It is his son-in-law, and it's, you know, you have Democrats who are increasing their calls to have his security clearance revoked in the wake of all this. It's unlikely that President Trump will take action to diminish Jared Kushner's role, because already it's outsized. This is the person the president has tasked with leading the new Office of American Innovation and managing, somehow reconciling peace between Israelis and Palestinians, among many other tasks. That would be overwhelming for the most experienced people in Washington, let alone a novice like Jared Kushner. So President Trump, at a time like this, when he's embattled, is likely to keep his, circle the wagons essentially, and keep his trusted inner circle close. But still, this is a White House in crisis.
So, Errol, talk to me about the president's agenda today. We know that he's going to be there attending the women's golf tournament there, and he's got health care on his mind. He wants to push this forward. Do you think the chances are that this will happen next week in the Senate, getting a vote through?
Well, on the president's movements, this New Jersey golf property of his is one of his favorites. He visits here frequently, and there are no public events on the president's schedule, although he did send out a tweet earlier today saying that he will be at the U.S. Women's Golf tournament taking place there, so we may see him today. But on the healthcare front, it is, despite the president's overtures on Twitter to Senate Leader Mitch McConnell and others to get a deal done, to do something, it appears that it just does not have enough Republican support in the Senate plan, to even move ahead to a vote, which would be incredibly damaging for the president, who has still yet to claim a major legislative achievement within his first 6 months. In addition to that, Rena, this kind of like low possibility that a healthcare reform will come through, you also have the president's travel ban continuing to be held up in a type of legal limbo, a Hawaiian Circuit Court judge expanding the definition of who is permitted under this travel ban. Attorney General Jeff Sessions saying he will appeal that to the Supreme Court. So the Trump administration is still looking for some tangible legislation, some tangible changes they can point to within its first 6 months.
Much to watch on the policy front. Errol Barnett, thank you, who's traveling with the president.